Welcome to the Partist channel. Today we explain Exodus chapter 2 in a clear and simple way, step by step. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the context in chapter hook, move right into the birth and river rescue, then cover the violence and Moses fleeing from Egypt. After that, we'll look at his new life in Midian, how God hears Israel's groaning, and wrap it all up with some practical lessons and a quick recap. We'll trace Moses' whole life from an endangered little infant all the way to an exiled shepherd, and we're not going to rush it.
All right, part 1, context and chapter hook.
Now, before we actually jump right into the events of chapter 2, we really need to set the stage and understand the absolute nightmare situation happening in Egypt right now. The Israelites have been multiplying, right? And the Egyptian king is feeling totally threatened by this, so he's enslaved them with really bitter, backbreaking labor. But it gets worse. A horrific decree was just handed down at the very end of chapter 1. Every single newborn Hebrew boy literally has to be thrown into the Nile River to drown. That is the terrifying reality we're walking into today. And just so we're on the same page, we're going to be analyzing this chapter using a method called Peshat. If you're not familiar, Peshat basically means sticking to the most basic literal meaning of the plain text in its proper context. So no mysticism today, no deep symbolic interpretations or Kabbalah, just the literal, plain meaning, the who, what, where, and why. We're going to take our time, go verse by verse, and carefully unpack exactly what the text is actually telling us. Okay, let's dive into this. To really ground ourselves here, we have to recognize the incredibly dark cloud hanging over the opening words of this chapter. I mean, Pharaoh has basically commanded his entire nation to act as executioners, casting baby boys into the river while letting the girls live. It's a complete environment of peril for any Israelite family expecting a child. It's a psychological weight that's honestly almost impossible for us to even wrap our heads around. So, transitioning from chapter 1 to chapter 2 shifts us from this sweeping national tragedy straight into the incredibly intimate, terrifying reality of a single household just trying to survive under ultimate tyranny. Which brings us to section 2, birth and river rescue. Moving right into the very first verses, we instantly see some incredible human resistance to Pharaoh's cruel decree. The chapter starts by telling us about a man and a woman, both from the house of Levi, who get married. She gets pregnant and gives birth to a son. Now, the text makes a point to note that when she saw him, he was a goodly child. The Hebrew word used here is tov, meaning good, fine, or beautiful. Seeing this, she totally defies the king's direct orders and actually hides her infant for 3 agonizing months. Just imagine the pure stress of trying to keep a newborn baby quiet in a society that is literally ordered to kill him. Well, eventually, she just can't hide him safely anymore. So she takes an ark made of bulrushes, basically a papyrus basket, and meticulously coats it with tar and pitch to make it completely waterproof. She puts the child inside, and she physically sets this basket among the reeds right by the bank of the river. And there is just this massive, tragic irony happening here, right? Pharaoh ordered all the boys to be thrown into the Nile to die, and this mother literally obeys by putting him in the river, but she does it in a protective ark to save his life. She doesn't just abandon him there, though. Verse 4 tells us his older sister, who we know later as Miriam, stays standing at a distance to keep a close eye on what's going to happen to him. Then, out of nowhere, the narrative brings Pharaoh's own daughter down to the Nile to bathe. She spots this little basket sitting in the reeds and sends her maid over to grab it. When she opens it up, she sees a crying baby boy, and the text explicitly says she had compassion on him. She immediately figures out what's going on, saying, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." It's a really profound moment. She knows exactly what her father ordered, yet she chooses compassion over compliance, totally subverting the king's law. And right at this exact moment, the baby's sister pops out from her hiding spot. She's incredibly brave and thinks fast on her feet, asking the princess, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" The princess is like, "Yes, go." So the sister runs and gets the baby's actual mother. This leads to this absolutely incredible twist of fate in verse 9. Pharaoh's daughter tells the woman to take the child away and nurse it for her, and even promises to pay her wages. So you have the biological mother being hired, protected, and paid by the Egyptian royal house to nurse her own hidden son. You couldn't script it better. After this, we get a bit of a time jump. In verse 10, when the child grows older and is weaned, his mother brings him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he officially becomes her adopted son. Think about that shift. He goes from the hidden, oppressed margins of society straight to the absolute epicenter of Egyptian royal power. The princess is the one who gives him his name, Moses, or Moshe in Hebrew. She actually explains her reasoning right there in the text, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." So the name literally comes from the Hebrew root mashah, which means to draw out. It's a name totally defined by his rescue, but it perfectly foreshadows his ultimate destiny of drawing his own people out of Egypt, even though literally no one knows that yet.
All right, moving on to Section 3, Violence and Fleeing Egypt.
Now we enter the next major phase of his life. Moses isn't a baby anymore, he's grown up into a young man. Verse 11 tells us he goes out to his brethren and looks on their burdens. Now this is a massive psychological and identity choice. I mean, he was raised as an Egyptian prince, right? Yet the text explicitly points out that he recognizes the enslaved Hebrews as his brethren. He's choosing to align himself with the oppressed. So, while he's out there, he sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew. Moses makes a highly calculated decision here. He looks this way and that way, checks to make sure the coast is clear, and steps in. He strikes the Egyptian dead to protect the Hebrew slave, and then buries the body in the sand. This one action totally solidifies his loyalty to his blood relatives. But, and this is a big but, it instantly makes him a murderer under the laws of the very empire that raised him.
So, the very next day, Moses goes out again. This time, he sees two Hebrew men fighting each other. He tries to take the moral high ground and intervene, asking the aggressor, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" But the guy just fiercely snaps back at him in verse 14. "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Oh man, this is a devastating, totally shattering moment for Moses. He probably thought his people would appreciate his solidarity and accept him as a protector. But nope, instead they reject his authority completely and weaponize his own deadly secret right back at him. In a flash, Moses realizes his crime is public knowledge. He's rejected by his own people, outcast from his royal Egyptian life, and sheer terror just sets in. Let's see how this builds incredibly rapidly in verse 15. Word of the murder gets back to Pharaoh, who immediately seeks to have Moses killed. All that royal protection he had, totally gone. Moses is now a wanted man, a fugitive running for his life. The text says he flees from the face of Pharaoh. Just think about the massive physical and geographical shift happening here. He's leaving the only home he's ever known, this bustling, fertile, super powerful Nile River valley, and journeying far, far away into the harsh, desolate wilderness. He finally stops and dwells in the land of Midian, just sitting down exhausted by a well. Literally, in a matter of days, this guy has lost his royal status, his family, his homeland, and his entire sense of purpose.
This brings us to Section 4, A New Life in Midian.
We completely shift settings here, moving away from the oppressive empire of Egypt to the quiet, dusty region of Midian. Here, sitting by a well, Moses is about to have a very different kind of encounter. The priest of Midian has 7 daughters, and they come to this well to draw water for their father's flock. But these aggressive local shepherds show up and forcefully drive the women away. Now, pay close attention here, because Moses' core character hasn't changed one bit. He is a tired fugitive, far from home, yet his internal drive to fight injustice gets triggered instantly. But look at the contrast with his time in Egypt. In Egypt, his intervention was sneaky and ended up in a murder. But here in Midian, verse 17 tells us he just stands up, comes to the women's rescue, helps them against the shepherds, and actually waters their flock himself. He's using his strength to serve and protect, but without resorting to fatal violence this time.
When the daughters get back home, surprisingly early, their father Reuel is like, "Hey, how come you're back so soon today?" They explain that an Egyptian delivered them from the hands of the shepherds and even drew water for the flock. It's actually really fascinating that they identify him visually or culturally as an Egyptian, right? By the way, a quick note on Reuel, he's also known later in the text as Jethro. It's super common in the Tanakh for key figures to go by multiple titles or names. Anyway, Reuel shows incredible cultural hospitality when he hears what happened. He asks his daughters, "Well, where is he? Why did you just leave the man out there? Call him that he may eat bread." So Moses is invited in, he agrees to stay and live with Reuel, and eventually Reuel gives his daughter Zipporah to Moses to be his wife.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is verse 22. Zipporah gives birth to a son, and Moses names him Gershom. Moses explicitly explains why he chose this name right there in the text, saying, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." This is such a profound window into his mindset. Even though he has found a wife, a father-in-law, and a completely safe haven in Midian, his internal reality is still one of deep, deep exile. He's totally alienated from his royal Egyptian upbringing, and he's completely severing and rejected by his Hebrew brethren. Despite having this brand new family, he truly feels like an alien in a foreign place, like he belongs absolutely nowhere.
Section 5. God hears Israel's groaning.
In these final verses of the chapter, the text signals a massive dramatic pivot in the narrative. We leave Moses quietly tending his new family out in Midian, and we zoom all the way back out to the suffering Israelites back in Egypt. Verse 23 tells us that during this really long period of time, the king of Egypt dies. Now, you might naturally think, okay, a change in leadership, maybe that brings some amnesty or at least a little relief, right? But it doesn't. The systemic, generational trauma of slavery just grinds on and actually gets worse. The passage of time feels so heavy here. The children of Israel sigh because of their brutal bondage. The psychological weight finally causes them to break, and they cry out. It is this desperate, collective groan rising up from the crushing weight of generations living in chains. And their cry finally goes up to God. The chapter wraps up with a truly profound sequence in verses 24 and 25, showing us exactly how God responds to this massive outcry. The text breaks it down into 4 specific, deliberate verbs. Step 1, God heard their groaning. This is the auditory reception of their deep pain. Step 2, God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This firmly locks their current agonizing suffering into the context of his ancient promises to their ancestors. Step 3, God saw the children of Israel. This is a direct, penetrating gaze right into their harsh reality, confirming that their plight is absolutely noticed. And finally, step 4, God took cognizance of them, or in some translations, knew them. This shifts from just observing to a profound active empathy. It's the ultimate signal that God understands their situation intimately, and that a major intervention is right on the horizon.
And finally, Section 6, Practical Lessons and Recap.
Let's synthesize all the literal facts and events we just walked through. If we closely recap the chapter, we can see Moses' incredibly rapid and drastic evolution through some entirely different identities. First, in verses 1 through 4, he was a hidden infant in mortal peril. Then, by verse 10, he's being raised as an adopted Egyptian royal with unimaginable privilege. Skip to verses 11 through 15, and he's acting as a violent fugitive desperately seeking justice. And finally, by verse 22, he's settled down as a humble stranger and a shepherd out in the deserts of Midian. Literally every geographic step stripped away another layer of his past comfort, systematically preparing him for this monumental calling that he doesn't even know about yet. So the crucial point we can extract straight from the plain text is observing Moses' completely unyielding character. I mean, whether he's walking the powerful streets of Egypt witnessing a Hebrew slave being brutally beaten, or sitting by a lonely well in Midian watching young women get bullied by aggressive shepherds, Moses never just sits back. He consistently steps up. He takes concrete action to protect the vulnerable and fight injustice, regardless of his own safety, his status, or the severe personal cost it might bring. It's a really profound, challenging life lesson for us to never turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, no matter where we happen to find ourselves.
And from those final verses detailing the absolute despair of the Israelites, we draw an incredibly powerful concluding lesson. Even when systemic oppressors seem totally unyielding, and tyrants die only to be replaced by worse cruelty while time just drags on seemingly forever, the cries of the suffering are never just lost to the void. The text is reassuring us that even in what feels like total, eternal silence and abandonment, the cries of the broken are deeply heard, remembered, seen, and known by God. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. How does the feeling of being a stranger in a strange land, exactly like Moses deeply felt, actually prepare us for our own true calling? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.